the lecture proper, let me ask you guys, have you, did you watch that TED Talk? I know that some of the MVP students have done that. I know some of you have not. How many of you have watched? I want to show some of the highlights from the second one. The TED Talk that is listed as a supplementary reading.
There are two.
Yeah, there are two, and it's the newer one. You haven't watched the newer one?
No.
Okay, well maybe we should take a moment to watch it, because I think one of the, I always call it, I think it's outsourcing of the teaching. You know, if someone can do it better, why not? So, and it's just a 15-20 minute video.
Lie of equity between gender, or if you're...
Okay, let's pause this for now, because he's actually going into, you know, the measurements of international development. Quick feedback before we go into theories. Violent objections, Sub-Saharan Africa has grown way bigger. He's very optimistic. So, any thoughts on what he's saying? Sidi?
I mean, I agree with him, especially just in this particular point that you can't compare your Argentina and your Mozambique, and then if they're not doing the same, then you say Mozambique is doing bad. Development is going to work different in different regions, and the problem is that traditional development, if I may say, has assumed that because the US industrialized, and that's how it was things are supposed to work. You know, it didn't acknowledge the fact that different strokes with different backs.
Awesome, yeah, so we're going to the theory side of things. Okay, any other feedback? Violent objections, agree with him?
I think it's odd because he's arguing against oversimplifying a lot, but I feel like he's also he swings back and forth. He'll say the problem is oversimplification, and then he'll grossly oversimplify.
Right, because what about the two indicators that he was basically using to actually sum up international development and poverty? Do you remember what the two of those were?
Fertility rates and mortality.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point, yeah. So, where do we balance?
And specifically with that thing, with what he was saying, Sub-Saharan Africa is doing the best. Well, the one thing Sub-Saharan Africa is the one thing.
Right.
And just maybe don't compare to Argentina, but there have clearly been countries that do better than other countries. And to just kind of try to sweep that under the rug is just as silly.
Right. Well, you know, maybe that's his issue, because he only knows 200 different types of countries. Maybe the reality is that there's 1,035.
I mean, I guess, you know, in the same stream, to sort of acknowledge the globalization that's happening in the world today, right? And sort of breaking away the state-led development model in the first place. But that's clearly not happening in a lot of African countries. If anything, the state is working as an impediment to development, right? And that is something that I couldn't sort of get on board with, the fact that he was so optimistic about, you know, infrastructure and, you know, whatever other things that could just improve things. And yeah, I agree that he's completely
I love that. Yeah, governance, state, you know, things that we will be talking very shortly when we delve in with the theory side of things. Any other feedback, Priya, or?
Yes, Priya.
That's what you get for sitting at the back. You remember my trend for liking to start at the middle, at the back?
No.
Oh yeah, you were not here during this class. I did that experiment where people started to introduce themselves from the middle of the back. Any other thoughts?
It was really great though to see the, you know, as you talk about like how development is sort of a historical process, right? It's really interesting that that was really sort of compelling, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it's also about the IT tools, right? I mean, there's statistics that lie, and then there's also IT tools that can lie better. So if you put the two together, you know, it becomes a fantastic tool to make your case. Yeah, I I think that you're spot on, right? Because at the end of the day, we still need to step back and ask ourselves, what is international development, right? What is it child mortality rates? Is it, which he says, child mortality equals health, right? And the number of children, the fewer children equals better, right? That's kind of like the thinking, which is very 1960s population control type of thing. So with that as a backdrop, what I would love to do is to, you remember, right? I mean, this is the framework of our class, right? Conceptual technical management, and I want to point out that right now we're talking about what is development. Under what is development, there are 4 subtopics under there that are in the readings. The theories of international development, the measurement of international development, does development work in practice, and then also what you told me you're interested in about the real life job and careers. So today, I think we would be so lucky if we could do the first 2, and that's okay because, once again, apologies for all that kind of the choppy logistics with the class, but we will wait for the rest to catch up, and then we will be on the right pace. So with that as a backdrop, if you wanted to watch, there's the first TED Talk that he gave about 3 years ago, and that was before the UN opened up their database, right? So he was just using a smaller subset of database from the World Bank and partly from the UN, so this is a better one. And when we talk about measurement, then we'll watch a little bit more of the video. So with that, I'm guessing that you at least read or browsed or fake read the articles on what is development. So let's look at all these terms, right? I mean, if you look at what do they all mean, And honestly, from a practitioner's point of view, once upon a time, I go, well, I don't know, I don't care. As far as I'm concerned, I'm sort of bound by my donor rules, right? Whatever they define and whatever their philosophy is, that's where I am as a manager. And then I think, at some point, you kind of wonder, this is where we go into that Zen part, right? You guys want to know about the Zen of development. It's almost like a religion. What works in international development is something like what is the meaning of life, right? So you have your churches, you have your Buddhists, you have your Muslim, and then you have the smaller subgroups. So let's do a little bit of discussion. I mean, let's go through the history, right? Maybe that would be a clear way to discuss. What did the article say about, how did it all begin?
It began with the good old industrial age with liberalism and something else.
Awesome. Okay, liberal.
I forget.
So tell us a little bit about liberalism.
I remember the critique of
Okay, good. You can critique. Tell me a little bit about what the theory is saying about liberalism. Just in the layman's kind of language, right? I mean, you're talking about this is the golden age, the Enlightenment age. It was feudal lords before, kings and queens, and then all of a sudden, all these science people come out and wow, they invented new things. There's new art. They invented new technology that then started the process towards capitalization.
Yeah. So I think at this point it was still not so much of an, as how development over time became more of an economic concept.
Mm-hmm.
At this point it was still not so much about that, right? So definitely I guess the ideas of liberty and justice, etc.
Freedom, right? So it was more of a philosophy, right? Basically, like we want freedom. It's sort of like the U.S. when actually that's an irony, right? Because these are the same people who say, "Oh, wow, Europe is now free." And then why did people migrate to the U.S. from Europe? Because Europe is not free. Again, we wanted a freer place. So, tell me a little bit about. Let's move on. So, liberalism. Did everybody get that? So it's basically fundamental freedom.
And still not an economic, sort of view of development. Which is, I think,
it's not an economic. Okay, so what would be an economic? How is that evolving? Tara?
I think that also liberalism involves opening of for nations to engage in trade with each other.
Trade,
so
yeah.
In that sense, it does become somewhat
in some ways, I mean, slowly, you start talking about your cobblers stop being cobblers, and then there's a small little mass production, and then at some point, later on. there's more of a trading going on, not just locally, but regionally and globally. So yeah. So what was next? Then what did liberalism lead to? Somebody said critiques. We don't like that.
Communism and Karl Marx.
Why do people do that?
Because they think that liberalism can have bad aspects for people, alienation of works, the fact that at your work you do always the same thing. So liberalism could be a problem for that.
Awesome.
So we need another ideology.
And so some of the ideologies were expounded by various scholars, right? I mean, this is a pretty kind of simplistic framework because at that point in time, nobody came and said, oh yeah, this is liberalism, or yes, these are the critiques. At the end of the day, it's basically just smart people trying to write articles about the meaning of life, right? How do you develop and things like that. So somebody says this, and then somebody counters and says, no, that's not at all the case. And if you think about it, there's a parallel, right? At this point in time, it's like, wow, democracy, freedom, whatever. And then there's like, no, we need to focus not on the markets, but on the state, for example. So what are some of any more things to add on the critique side of things? What else were they saying about liberalism?
Okay, the fact that because now people are free, they can work for themselves, they can use money for those things, and because of that, there is a lot of tensions between the population, between people. So
it leads to a lot of social unrest. I mean, it's very WTO in a lot of ways, right? These people are saying, whoa, markets, freedom, whatever, and then these people are like, whoa, but then, working conditions, migrant workers, bad conditions. So there's a parallel. I mean, the debates that we're having today have these deep roots somewhere, right? It sounds very familiar. Well, let's move on. Okay, so then what happened then?
Well,
Krista?
threading through all of it is the theme of modernism and the belief that we can find a solution and apply it. Maybe when you're getting into critiques, the initial critiques were saying, well, liberalism isn't it, but they still bought into the modernization idea. Well, not modernization, I mean modernism.
Modernism,
The
okay.
idea that we can find.
So, which is sort of a older fashioned way of saying development, right?
Yeah.
Modernism.
But modernism, of course, did want to create modernization, so I didn't mean to.
Right. Okay, so this is great. Share with us what is the difference, modernization and modernism?
So modernism is more of a philosophy. Modernization might be what you would say a modernist wants to bring about. But modernism, to my understanding, and I haven't studied this deeply, I'm actually fairly new to international development, and that's where I became familiar with it. But modernism is the idea that there is this linear path that we can follow.
Right.
The state that we don't want to be in to the state that we do want to be in.
Okay.
And there's a very scientific process about it. Just like define the problem, find the solution, apply it.
Okay. Good point. Any feedback on that?
Is that what you said is modernism?
That's what
I think that's the same thing as modernization theory as well, actually, that there is like this unidirectional trajectory to going from being a traditional society to a modern society, right? And so I haven't actually heard much of modernism, but perhaps they're interrelated in that sense.
Yeah, and it's true. I mean, modernization was sort of, it kind of grew out from the liberalism family, right? Because at the end of the day, if you just think of it from a layman's term, well, there's freedom, and then the freedom seems to be brought about by capitalism. So therefore, there must be a way, and all these European countries were sort of doing a path that was fairly kind of consistent. Right? You open up your markets, you specialize, Adam Smith and all that. So therefore, from the post-1950s onwards, the whole modernization theory became the predominant theory. Why was 1950 sort of a benchmark for a new kind of theory? So in the paper, they made a distinction between like these old archaic theories and then 1950s onwards to 1970s. Why was 1950 such a thing? That's a good point, yeah. Along those lines, think more about what happened about that time. What was the history like?
post-World War II.
Also,
Is
So-
the reconstruction of Europe?
colonialism
Colonial states was ending.
was ending. Yeah, those was a lot of the trends. So what did that mean?
Like developing countries emerged, like the third world.
That's why they call it the third world. I mean, which is the second world? You're familiar with the second world that we don't have anymore? What is the second world?
USSR and all of
The communist bloc, anybody that joins. And then the third world is anybody who is not within the superpowers, right? So the third world. And that has a lot of baggage. I mean, in industry, we don't really use that anymore. But yeah, that's why modernization became a thing. And within the international development movement, where we start seeing in practice the money flowing in, donors coming up, NGOs being created, that was actually right after World War II. And it was sparked by first humanitarian work, right? These Europeans, they had no shelter, it was the end of war, CARE started to drop packages down, and that was humanitarian work that then led to more international development type work. And so it became more or less, not formalized, but that was a budding industry. That's why we always say international development as an industry is actually pretty new. Okay, so that's modernization. Let's go on. What's dependency then? Dependency, Challenger, you look very in pain.
I think when we talk of dependence, we're talking of like when you have your economy, like you don't have like total economic freedom. You have like people, you look for like donor funds, or you have a lot of debt. You're looking for other institutions you have to go run in the country or something like that.
Right. And why did that come about? I mean, how did that theory even bubble up?
Well, I can tell from what I think happened, like in Africa. I think in Africa, what happened, like when most of these countries got independence, some of them went through war to get their independence. So they were sort of like just like this, the situation that happened after the First World War. Countries spent a lot of money in the war. So when they got their independence, they didn't have money. So they went to the financial institution, the IMF, the World Bank, for loans so that they can start a government. And I think in the process of doing that, they didn't actually succeed in implementing the policies. So they kept on going back and borrowing money and sort of became like dependent of those financial
Right.
institutions.
Sounds like our credit card debt, right? Or maybe school loans, I don't know. But yeah, that's exactly kind of it. At the gist of it, I mean, what's the fundamental side about dependency theory? It's basically say, hey, you guys, from the first world or, the white world is telling us that there is this blueprint, right? You do A, B, C, D. And then because the big banks, that they are the ones that are lending money, are basically implementing that from that modernization theory, that's what they're doing. They're basically saying, well, if you want to borrow money from us, then these are the conditions and these are the 5 steps you have to take. What happened when they borrowed the money was it went into this path of circling into that, right? And then in addition to that, what were they talking about? The reliance, peripheral, or the reliance on the first world. I mean, that is a big thing. It's a vicious cycle. And what about the whole peripheral power struggle, first, third world? Tara?
I think when modern countries are defining modernity for the rest of the world, it creates like a path dependency, like you were saying with the blueprint, that this is what development should look like. But it disempowers like those nations as well because they don't they're not establishing a tailored development for themselves and them. So it I think it establishes a imbalance in power that will continue on to maybe it's just disempowering for a nation to be on another country's path of development towards a different
that's a good argument. Yeah, basically it's a simple word. It basically says you are making me depend on you, so that once I depend on you, I can't get out of this cycle, right? And if you think about it, this is kind of the same argument sometimes. Maybe poor people in any country would talk about the rich. It's like the rich keeps getting richer and then the poor keeps getting poorer, right? So, because why? That's this dependency path. And a lot of what was happening then was the agricultural movement. And what happened was that the first world, okay, for want of a better word, was basically producing all these end goods, right? That basically your returns was way higher than the raw materials that they were taking from the developing countries. So what happens is that, well, while the developing countries were maybe, increasing their GDP, if at all, by say 0.5%, these folks were building on the returns. I mean, those of you who study economics would know, right? I don't even remember what that theory is called, but it's the one that, what is that called? Supply chain or something, where at each stage of production, the higher the level is, the more your returns are. So that's what they're basically saying. They're like, well, you're stripping us of our raw materials, you're using us for cheap labor, you're basically, you kind of, made us colonies anyway, and you stripped us of everything, and then now you're taking more of it. And then it becomes a dependency thing, because the third world has to continue to supply the things to basically catch up with the economy. Does that make sense? Anything to add on the dependency side of things? So dependency is just a big, broad, basically what we're trying to do right now is just to make sense of all these smattering of basically resistance. If you think about it, these are the big WTO people, and then these are the little rebels that are like, oh yeah, this is not working because, and everybody has, their own philosophy, like, the Occupy movement, for example. Okay, well, let's go quickly into neoliberalism. What is that, and where does that fall into?
Just the freeing of markets, really. Just the opening of markets. Yeah.
Markets, okay, and Krista?
The idea that governments are getting in the way of development, we need retrenchment, get them out of the way so that, as you said, markets can really take over.
Right, so basically it's kind of from this family, right? Because if you think about it, these folks are talking about markets. And this is not that different from the arguments that we have today with the WTO, World Bank, Occupy movement. It's the same kind of family. And then there's a spectrum of arguments, and these folks are saying, nope, state and people. Right? So the philosophy at the end of the day, right, while they vary, and even within, if you really study the theory in each of these, there are sub theories. Each of them are slightly different in certain ways, but at the end of the day, the philosophy is about, well, it's the same thing that we're talking about these days, right? How good are open markets? And should the government be involved? So it's kind of the same pattern of debates that we're having. So neoliberalism is basically a pretty, it's a much more extreme form of modernization in the sense that it advocates for almost no government control, and therefore no NGO, and that's why it leads to the term the death of development. Okay, what about, let's go into, what's post-modernization?
So with modernism being the idea that identify the problem, apply solution, thereby good results, postmodernism kind of critiques the idea that we can even identify a problem. Like there's differences and maybe our normative judgments on top of it are even wrong.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. You see, if you think of it, did everybody get that? So at some point, and then you have to put this in a historical context, right? What happened in practice? Well, this was sort of in the 1960s, and the World Bank, everybody was like saying, wow, this is the way to development, here's all this money, this is what you need to do. And then after that 15 years, they get into this dependency thing. Wait, it's not working. So these guys come and say, wait a minute, you guys, it's not working. What are you guys talking about? This is what we need to do. We need to have a revolution. We need to have, kind of the farmers be the people that own it, or a variety of ways that they're talking about their theories, right? And then at some point, some folks come and say, my gosh, can you just stop arguing and look at what's happening really in the real world? Because what's the answer? The answer might be it depends, right? Which is what, Krista, you're saying, well, let's look at all these other different factors. There might not be a blueprint either way. Each country is different. Forget about lumping Africa into a pot. So tell me a little bit about postmodernization and what are some of the things that have come out from there. some of the sub-theories or some of the thinking. You know, what are some of the ideas? Right, like Robert Chambers, I don't know if you know, putting the poor first. Is it putting the poor? Wow, it's been
Local context.
yeah, local context, right? Because it depends. Look at your local context. You know, and actually all these come out from the postmodernization movement because it's sort of a despair, you know, because at the end of the day, after 40 years and billions and billions and billions of aid, well, maybe the professor would argue differently, but the general consensus in the development world is like, you know, maybe things have improved a lot, but is it really worth these billions and billions and billions of dollars? And really, is it because of these billions and billions of dollars that things have improved? Maybe not even. So then these folks are coming out and basically saying, no, we really need to be cognizant of the realities and some of the more nuanced things. So then, Krista, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask if postmodernism is where the idea came in that maybe people don't want to be like Europe or people don't want to be like the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah.
Both the liberalism, neoliberalism, and the dependency theories all kind of based on the assumption that we should all be trying to boost GDP either through markets or state-led development, and postmodernism kind of says, is that what we want?
Is that what we really want?
Does that
Right?
actually make us happy?
That's awesome. I mean, that's like the church saying, well, you know, the purpose of life is to go to heaven and to believe in God, right? And at some point, people says, wait a minute, is that really it? Maybe there might be nuances. Maybe we all might be believing in different things. And so a lot of the things that come out here, some of them are considered theory, I guess, and some of them are just sort of concepts, some of them are approaches. But at the end of the day, all these things are kind of the new kind of thinking, you know, about, and they all move in the spectrum, right, of where the markets versus the state. So if you look at things like institution came from this neoliberalism people, right? They basically say, okay, fine, we're not going to agree with these folks, you know, at all, but we will concede that governments have some role to play, but they have to be as efficient as businesses. So therefore you see money going into governance, right, and institutions. And you still hear these terms a lot. These are the terms that are actually what we have today. Institutions. Right? So that's a very sort of still top-down. Globalization, it comes from the same pot, right? Where basically it's folks moving a little bit more into a kind of, I don't know if it's an equilibrium thing, but at least the debates are more nuanced. Like, okay, let's not talk about these broad blueprints. And things like right space approach. Tell me a little bit about right space approach. What's that? And, you know, Nobel Peace Prize, etc. What's a right space approach? Or what's, you know, Amartya Sen, development as freedom.
Sorry, I feel like I'm monopolizing a little bit. But so liberalism would view rights as a tool that might be necessary to bring about development, like property rights and whatnot. But a rights-based approach more emphasizes rights as a goal. Like people should have rights. That's a valuable end instead of just a means.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So basically what Sen was saying was, well, you know, actually we don't care about money or we don't really care about markets or state because at the end of the day what we all want is freedom, right? And so his was very conceptual. From there, you come up, the actual applications are the rights-based approaches. So you have a whole variety of things. Some of them uses the UN human rights as the fundamental instrument. Some of them uses other things. So I just want to mention like all these things, you know, fall somewhere in the spectrum. Gender, right? Basically people say, you know what? And this I see in practice a lot. You know, when I was with CARE, we did a microfinance type of project. And when the man actually, you know, you have a microfinance, say income generating project, whether you're growing mushrooms or whatever. Now, if the man is given possession of the money, generally, right, not all the times, but the pattern is that they spend it outside of the family. They, you know, go to the bars, they might go gambling, squander it, prostitution, you know, and we're talking about rural development. Whereas if you get the woman in charge of that project, she generally is very protective about the money and resources and keeps it within the family. That's a very simplistic argument about the gender role, but I've seen it firsthand in practice. So all these are sort of, all these theories that we're trying to come up with a simple framework for understanding that. Does everybody get these kinds of, get the framework that we're talking about? Any questions on this before we move on to the next step? Anything we've missed, any archaic theory that we haven't done, you know? Anything you want to ask about?
I mean, I just wanted to make a point regarding the gender-based thing that you just spoke about, right? I mean, that's true, like the general understanding in microfinance is that lend money to women, they will always repay on time. I think the bigger thing, rather than that they spend on the family, for the provider himself, the perspective is that women tend to repay on time more than men do. But the problem is, and it's always sort of, you know, taken to sort of extol women and, oh my God, look at them, and they're looking after the families, and they're, you know, making us money, etc. But there's always a danger of it becoming a very misogynistic sort of discourse as well. The fact of, you know, the matter is that women sometimes pay on time because they're men who are dispersing the loans, or they're men who are asking for the loans back, you know, and then women are expected to look after the family, right? So, I mean, just along those lines, just when you think about gender, just when you think about gender rights, it's important to sort of remember those kind of distinctions as well.
Right. Yeah, and that's a really good point. I mean, the thing about theories is that we try to make an imperfect world fit in nice boxes to try to explain certain things, right? And in every one of these things, there's a variation. There's like, but then it depends. So you have newer and newer and newer types of theories, which is why development right now is more messy than ever, in the sense that there's a lot more experimentation and a lot more openness than, nope, there's only this one way to do development. Good point. Any last words to add about theories before we go on to? Okay, so on that note, right, so this is a simple framework we're talking about, you know, and it's extremely simple. So we're basically boiling down all these theories, and you can read about them in more detail. I mean, I think the paper has a lot of resources, so if you're really interested in theory, you can delve with it. But as you know, this is a really broad course and an introductory course. So you have these folks that are more for the, you know, if you think about it, it's a little bit like Republican versus Democrat, or, you know, the WTO versus the people, and then there's the, okay, but it depends, folks, let's not be so extreme. Although sometimes these people are extreme too. So that's how I kind of group them along a spectrum. Got it? So the question for us is, okay, fine, you know, this is a course that is development in practice. How does this apply? So what I would love to do is for us to do an exercise, right? And here is a case study. Your top level, fill in your philosophy. And this is a real life thing, right? Because if you're high enough in any organization, these are the types of decisions you're making on a day-to-day level. So you're all trying to address countries' A's low-skilled worker migration issues. We're all familiar with this, like the Philippines or Bangladesh. No jobs at home, workers migrate, work in rich countries, send home remittances, right? Remittances is one of the major money movements in the world. Families are broken up, you know, there's a lot of social issues surrounding that, you know. And then you have $10 million to design a program that works based on your international development system, whether it's the liberalization side of things, the postmodernism, and we will pick a couple depending on the group, and also the critiques of liberalism. So what I would love to do is to divide us into groups of 3. How many groups do we have then? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Awesome, so that's 4 groups, am I correct? Okay, so what I would love for you to do is to let us know if you are in this group, what are some of the activities that you would actually put in the program? You know, are you going to put in social revolution, you know, and why, based on your theory? So if we have 4 groups, so we'll do one that is liberalism and then one that's on the other extreme. And then let's do, should we do that? Okay, so let's see, so there are 4 groups. Liberalism, dependency, and then rights-based, and then actually, you know what, let's do gender-based, it's more fun. Gender-based, okay? So what I would love for you to do is to discuss for just quickly 10 minutes, and then give us a quick 10 minutes presentation on your top activities and why.
What was
So the groups are liberalism, which is this group, so it's 3 each. Then 3 of you is the dependency theory, and then, wait, how many groups we have? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 3. Oh, so we have 3 groups, okay, fine. So then we'll just do postmodernism, right? Yeah, so we'll do postmodernism, pick one.
It's this group.
Right space?
Right.
Right space approach? Okay. Does that make sense? No. Want me to explain again?
I guess I just don't quite know. I'm in this group theory.
Yes, because that's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
Got it.
Okay, so you guys are the right space approach. You guys are the dependency. And then you'll take this and you'll give us, so you have 10 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, are we ready? Okay, $10 million spent. And to be honest, sometimes that's how donors do programs. I mean, in fact, sometimes that's how we implement programs where we're like, oh my goodness, the project period is going to be over in a month and we haven't spent, the last $500,000. We better do that because otherwise we're not going to spend $500,000.
That's a malady with the developing sector where it's like your success is determined by how much money you spend.
Well, it's called accountability, and that's the whole problem when you talk about implementation, because otherwise what's going to happen is that they will cut short your funds for the next year, right? And then they will say, well, you didn't promise to deliver all these deliverables. So anyway, but who's going to start? Okay, let's start with the liberalism, folks. Who's going to present? Let's stick this on the wall. Huh? Well, just talk about it.
I mean, I guess our worldview really is that we believe in free, open markets. And so what I'm assuming the problem is that we don't have very skilled workers in our country and they're migrating to another country, and we want some of that money to come to us easily because that money is good for us. It helps increase our GDP. So I guess the first thing that we wanted to do was just sort of encourage innovation in remittance services.
Everybody see this?
Yeah. Encourage innovation in remittance services. Maybe do a proposal like, hey, we'll give $1 million to the company with the best proposal as to how to make remittance services more accessible across borders.
Awesome, and honestly, this is really on track with what's going on right now. The whole innovation, especially in the ICTD space, comes from this world. And you're right, the liberal folks or the neoliberal folks will say, well, there's nothing wrong with that. All that needs to be done is to make sure that the money goes back and then everything's going to be solved, simplistically. Okay, go on.
You guys want to talk about it?
So another project activity? Open markets to increase job opportunities?
Just basically also encourage innovation within the domestic sector, remove some of the licenses required, the bureaucratic hassles, etc., to create job opportunities so that we don't have to send our citizens outside of the country.
Did everybody hear that? Right? Yeah, open markets, that's exactly the case. Even if it's an ICT project, you would say, well, you know what, then let's just do a mobile money transfer project. Let's do a web-based, transfer money project. That's easy. Okay, and then what's your last one?
Okay, I was thinking that maybe after that, when you are in open market and some innovation in your country, you would like to that your citizens that live in another country come back at home to innovate and something like that. So maybe you can set up some institutions to help them with money to come back and with some stations, politics.
Yeah, absolutely. Set up the institutions to encourage these, whatever, just to encourage this efficient government and encourage the smooth running of the money. Social problems, it's okay. The money will take care of it. It will trickle down, right? That's a simplistic way, but you're right. And I'll tell you this, if you look at any of the real-life RFPs, and we will look at that when we look at implementation about fundraising, you see that these are the typical variations of these programs, like Innovation Labs, which I just finished writing a proposal for in Cambodia. All right, let's talk to the dependency people.
Okay,
Okay, let's go. Okay, let's hear from the rights people. So you're the postmodernist right-space approach, Amartya Sen. Wow. Very nice. Okay, tell us, what is your program?
So yeah, we decided that since rights-based approach is mostly like focusing on different freedoms or rights that the workers probably are entitled to. We focused on the financial freedom, which is by providing microfinance loans to maybe the workers' families for their entrepreneurial ventures, providing basic job training to these workers, and also supporting the workers' families' education, like the kids, the workers' kids and stuff like that. And then providing healthcare, a good healthcare access and opportunities to the workers' families, like giving out good plans to these families to make healthcare more accessible and affordable for them, and also like setting up advocacy groups to protect the workers' jobs, job securities, their rights. Yeah, so these are the areas that we identified.
Okay. Anything else to add? And that's right, because you're saying, well, everybody has a right to education. That's our starting point. Everybody has a right to health. Everyone has a right to, you know, working conditions. Everyone has a right to make their own income, right to sustainable livelihood. Krista?
And the idea that these are the base conditions that are necessary to access your other rights. You need to be educated to be able to participate in your right to the market.
Absolutely.
An advocacy group will protect you or advocate for you if somebody tries to deny your right to access healthcare or education or money transfers.
Awesome. So you can see, you know, just it's so different. Your $10 million. There's nothing really here that's on advocacy. This is sort of, you know, market-based, and in the real world, it's a hodgepodge, right? A lot of the times, a liberal person, well, I say this loosely, right? But someone here and someone here is sitting there and they're the same rank. At the end of the day, they compromise and say, all right, let's just put this element there and this element there. So there's a lot of times, you know, your RFPs are just kind of hodgepodges of not very theoretically based type of thinking. Okay, let's hear from the dependency folks, the angry, you know, like the critical folks.
We tried taking a country, say, it's in between communist and capitalist. First, our main notion was like, people do not know what they want, so we should like sort of do it for them. So in that way, we sort of like, I made policies to identify families with which, or individuals which we should support with the end. So basically we're going to have like sort of the NGO fund. Then we identify people who we're going to give the money to. And we're going to implement a couple of policies, like we're going to have like social enterprises where basically we look for people with bright ideas, then give them funds so that they set up like businesses which are sustainable. Then we also provide capital, we train them, we help them with consulting. Then we also have like office space where like if you have a business or you're trying to do something, we give them office space where they can come and work, sort of office space or impact hub. Then also as to like promote them in a sort of dependent way, we give them rewards. Let's say you do a business and it's successful, we give you rewards. Then also incentives.
Yeah, it's basically, you know, it's kind of a tricky, at least for me, the theory, the dependency theory, because it depends on what do you mean by dependency. In this case, if you have an outside fund pumping in this money that you know I can just go get capital there, and they're going to give me more money if I hire more workers, and I have an incentive for having a good business, then you're kind of dependent, you're making the people in the country dependent on those funds, right? So, but basically what we have there is a structure of what we would use the 10 million for. So we're just selecting entrepreneurs and how we would pump the money into whatever business that they're doing. And if they're opening businesses in the country, then they're going to hire local labor, then maybe they're not going to be going outside to look for employment, they'll stay in. But you know, either way, the economy is not generating their own capital initially. We're just giving them, they're not really learning how do you create your own capital.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, let's step back a little bit, right? I mean, we're only looking at very, very high level, simplistic type of theories. Think about this, right? Your $10 million as a donor could be a variety of implementation and projects, just simply based on your belief system, right? And loosely we call them, the theories of international development. I mean, even if you look at, for example, your, say, incentives for local businesses, this is very local level. You're looking at, well, we want to get back our power. We want these local families to get back their power. Your innovation grants that are like, maybe development, your DIL grants that are right here, like, oh yeah, let's just spread it out and let's just get these high levels. So do you get a sense of what I'm trying to do here? I'm trying to tie in all these theories, and we can talk about them to death and to detail. But in application, right, in practice, this is what we end up seeing, and a lot of the times we respond to that as practitioners, right, unless you are at a very high level where you could actually make certain strategic decisions for your donor. Any questions or last words to wrap up before we call off class? Was this, yep?
Two little questions. How about advocacy groups like, if you had an NGO whose goal was to shape the political climate for some better business practices, or let's say even like a new type of business entity that's like a social enterprise, so that they can create that as as part of the legal framework to facilitate people in the country from doing that. Like, does that count as like a dependency?
Well, if you talk about legal framework, so basically you're saying, well, okay, fine and dandy, we're doing this on the local level. What if we make it into a more of a policy kind of level, right? So you go into this good governance thing, you set up the institution. So at some point, for example, if you're sitting at the table, we would say, well, okay, well then let's have a working group on social entrepreneurship for, this local area. And then that's how they would be formed. And part of the working group's mandate would be to make a white paper for policy changes. Does that make sense? See, the development role is not as clear as this. You will see an RFP with a hodgepodge of all these things.
Even organizations that write research papers and stuff like that, they're just, because it's also the sentiment of the public, which then kind of bubbles upwards to political change too.
Well, yeah, right? That's true. A lot of the times it's not just the simplistic theory, it's the political reality about what's happening and what people want, like Congress or, Obama versus Bush, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, good point. Any last points? Hopefully this is helpful. I just think there's a point for you to take back, is to say, in practice, this is what happens. And it's an imperfect world, even though the theories themselves, might be very clean cut and nice. Okay, so no last questions, right? So I'll see you Monday at, let's do 11 for now. Okay, otherwise the changes are going to be crazy. Thank you, everyone.